Located in Eastern Asia and officially known as the People's Republic of China, China is a mysterious country where modernization and tradition, progress and conservatism coexist. China is the second largest Asian country and has a population of over 1.35 billion, which accounts for 19.1% of the world's total population, greater than any other countries in the world. China's history traces back to 5000 BC, when the earliest recorded human settlements were found. Its evolution has been under many different dynasties, and it was notably during the Tang Dynasty from 618 to 907, often called the Golden Age of Chinese history, that painting, sculpture, and poetry flourished, as well as woodblock printing, which enabled the mass production of books, accounting for its earliest known appearance. China remained, for a long time, largely isolated from the rest of the world's civilization and closely restricted foreign activities. By the end of the 18th century, only Canton, location of modern-day Hong Kong, and the Portuguese port of Macau were open to European merchants. But with the First Anglo-Chinese War in 1839, a long period of instability and concessions to Western colonial powers began. Following the war, several ports were opened up for trading, and Hong Kong was ceded to Britain. Treaties signed after further hostilities weakened Chinese sovereignty and gave foreigners immunity from Chinese jurisdiction. The Mao regime proclaimed the People's Republic of China on October 1, 1949, with Beijing as the new capital, and undertook the Great Leap Forward campaign in 1958, a disastrous program leading to 20 million deaths due to widespread famine. After Mao's death, despite China's challenging state at the time, President Deng Xiaoping worked towards establishing new relations with Westerners. Beijing and Washington announced full diplomatic relations in 1979. Under Deng Xiaoping's leadership, China's communist ideology went through a massive reinterpretation, and sweeping economic changes were set in motion. The Chinese scraped the personality cult that idolized Mao, muted Mao's old call for class struggle and exportation of the communist revolution, and imported Western technology and management techniques to replace the Marxist tenets that had slowed modernization. Successor presidents further developed foreign relations. Despite the fact that China is a communist country, many efforts have been made by the government to liberalize the nation's economy. And while corruption practices are more common than in the US, many multinational enterprises have been able to operate in China with tremendous success, and operating in Chinese markets has allowed them to stay ahead of the competition. China was admitted to the World Trade Organization in November 2001, which ended a 15-year debate over whether China is entitled to the full trading rights of capitalist countries. In May 2006, China completed the construction of the Three Gorge Dam, the largest hydroelectric dam in the world, and in July, China opened a 4.2 billion, 710-mile-long railway from Qinghai province to Lhasa. On September 27, 2008, astronaut Zhai Zhigang stepped out of the Shenzhou 7 spacecraft and made the first spacewalk by a Chinese astronaut. The achievement was an important step in China's quest to build a space station by 2020 and someday land on the moon. The 2008 Summer Olympic Games kicked off on August 8, 2008, with a spectacular opening ceremony that many observers called unparalleled. As host of the Olympics, China exceeded expectations, while the country also won a record 51 gold medals and a total of 100 medals. Substantial reforms in China began with the phasing out of collectivized agriculture and expanded to include the gradual liberalization of prices, fiscal decentralization, increased autonomy for state enterprises, creation of a diversified banking system, development of stock markets, rapid growth of the private sector, and opening to foreign trade and investment. From mid-2005 to late 2008, cumulative appreciation of the renminbi, China's official currency, against the US dollar was more than 20%. The restructuring of the economy and resulting efficiency gains have contributed to a more than tenfold increase in GDP since 1978. Measured on a purchasing power parity basis that adjusts for price differences, China in 2012 stood as the second largest economy in the world after the US. By the end of 2012, China's population at working age 15 to 64 was 1 billion, and per capita income was, and still is, below the world average, which has promoted many businesses to build plants and manufacture products in China. On March 14, 2013, Xi Jinping assumed the presidency of China, facing the daunting task of maintaining economic growth and increasing China's role as a global player. Since 2010, China is the world's largest exporter. China is also the world leader in gross value of industrial output, notably in mining and ore processing, iron, steel, aluminum, coal, machine building, consumer products, transportation equipment, telecommunications equipment, and satellites. The industry sector accounts for 45% of its GDP, and its industrial production growth rate in 2012 was 8.1%. China's high exporting ability is also a result of its large agricultural efforts, which account for 10% of its GDP. China is the world leader in gross value of agricultural output, such as rice, wheat, potatoes, corn, peanuts, oilseed, pork, and fish. Services account for the remaining 45% of total GDP. China's unemployment rate in 2012 was 6.5%, ranking as 68 out of 202 countries in the world having the lowest unemployment rate, ahead of the United States by 27 countries. While China's growth slowed in 2012, it was still the leader of all the major emerging economies. China's GDP growth in 2012 was 7.6% in the year's second quarter, ahead of India, Russia, and South Africa. Moreover, while there was a slowdown in China's production and consumption of consumer goods, basic resources, and materials, the country's tourism, education, medical care, and luxury car industries thrived throughout 2012. Shanghai, Beijing, and Hong Kong are some of the drivers of country growth, and, as a result, the government is working towards promoting inland city growth, which only account for a smaller percentage of GDP growth. For example, the Chinese government allowed French multinational enterprise Peugeot Citroën to open up its factories in China only if it were in Wuhan, a small inland Chinese city which highly benefited from this foreign direct investment. As a world leader in outputs and exports, China has experienced rapid expansion and economic growth, which has brought in an inflow of money from investors worldwide. The explosive growth of China's emerging middle class has brought sweeping economic change and social transformation. Where the average income for a family today is 13,000 yuan, about $2,000 a year, research suggests that by 2022, more than 75% of China's urban consumers will earn 60,000 to 229,000 yuan annually, which equals 9,000 to 34,000 US dollars a year. In the decade ahead, the middle class continued expansion will be powered by labor market and policy initiatives that push wages up, financial reforms that stimulate employment and income growth, and the rising role of enterprises, which should encourage productivity and help more income accrue to households. The evolution of the middle class means that sophisticated and seasoned shoppers, those able and willing to pay a premium for quality and to consider discretionary goods and not just basic necessities, will soon emerge as the dominant force. The behavior of today's upper middle class provides some clues to China's future. Research indicates that these consumers are more likely to buy laptops, digital cameras, and specialized household items, such as laundry softeners, purchased by 56% of the upper middle class consumers surveyed last year, compared with just 36% of the mass middle. Along with affluent and ultra-wealthy consumers, upper middle class ones are stimulating rapid growth in luxury goods consumption, which has surged at rates of 16 to 20% annually for the past 4 years. By 2015, barring unforeseen events, more than 1/3 of the money spent around the world on high-end bags, shoes, watches, jewelry, and ready-to-wear clothing will come from Chinese consumers in the domestic market or outside the mainland. China's new middle class also divides into different generations, the most striking of which we call Generation 2. It comprised nearly 200 million consumers in 2012 and accounted for 15% of urban consumption. In 10 years' time, their share of urban consumer demand should more than double to 35%. By then, Generation 2 consumers will be almost 3 times as numerous as the baby boomer population that has been shaping U.S. consumption for years. These Generation 2 consumers today are typically teenagers and people in their early 20s, born after the mid-80s and raised in a period of relative abundance. They are confident, independent-minded, and determined to display that independence through their consumption. Most of them are the only children in their families because when they were born, the government was starting to enforce its one-child policy quite strictly. McKinsey research has shown that this generation of Chinese consumers is the most westernized to date. Prone to regard expensive products as intrinsically better than less expensive ones, they are happy to try new things, such as personal digital gadgets. They are also more likely than previous generations to check the internet for other people's usage experiences or comments. These consumers seek emotional satisfaction through better taste or higher status. They are loyal to the brands they trust, and they prefer niche over mass brands. Since the late 1970s, China has moved from a closed, centrally planned system to a more market-oriented one that plays a major global role. China has emerged as a world leader in its manufacturing and exporting and has developed a powerful, fast-rising economy. Continued growth in the size and diversity of China's middle class will create new market opportunities for both domestic and international companies. There will be plenty of opportunities for companies whose strategies reflect China's new constellation of rising income, shifting urban landscapes, and generational change. Also, China's population growth is expected to rise sharply as the government announced in November 2013 that 2 single-child parents may be granted the authorization to have more than 1 child, which should also spur future demand and GDP growth. With towering mountains, pristine lakes and rivers, mighty waterfalls and gorges, China offers stunning landscapes, world-class attractions, and a growing market filled with many opportunities. Forbes outlines the industries where opportunities will arise, assuming China's leaders are successful in a growing economy. These industries are consumer products and services, technology, agriculture, healthcare, and financial services. This prediction highlights that there is, in fact, still room for growth in China and that the foreign direct investments opportunities are plentiful. Some companies have been able to significantly increase their profits and stay competitive by distributing products in China. A good example is Coca-Cola, whose volume in China increased 9% last quarter of 2013, including an 8% rise in soft drinks without any significant pricing promotions. While operating in China is very different, especially with lagging patent rights, which may be challenging at times, many companies have been able to overcome these issues and seize the many opportunities the Chinese market offers.